The U.S. is no stranger to building highways. The interstate highway system allows for businesses and citizens alike to drive anywhere in the country on fast, mostly free, and uninterrupted roads. Even though some parts of the country have more freeways than others, there aren't many large cities without a freeway connection of some kind. However, if we look into the other end of this equation, we can start to see some of the flaws with the interstate system. That is, some of the places that for some reason have their own interstate connection. There couldn't be any better example of this than I-180 in Illinois. Just looking at this highway, it becomes immediately obvious why it shouldn't exist. It connects to literally nothing. Sorry to all 745 people of Hennepin, Illinois, but there's absolutely no reason that you should have an interstate spur all to yourself. Having a singular steel factory that doesn't exist anymore is not a valid reason for an interstate, but we have better interstates to talk about. There's plenty of videos out there that explain this monstrosity. Next up is Interstate Sub? That can't be right. Wait a minute, what does that sign down there say? Subscribe if you care about highways and geography. You know what? That's a pretty good idea, but I actually care about what interstate this really is. Oh, I-587. I have one word. Why? There's no exits on it, and you have to go through a roundabout to even get on it from I-87, and it serves a town of 24,000 people? There's towns in Wyoming with a bigger population than that. The whole thing overlaps with New York 28 anyway, so why even bother? If you have to sign every piece of road as an interstate, why not give the I-587 designation to this connector out further north? Next up is the other interstate for the thumbnail, I-381. Similar to the last entry, it has no exits along its route and ends at the first intersection it encounters. However, it's a bit of an upgrade since it does have a direct connection to the main interstate. But once again, there's no need to have an interstate designation here at all. Leaving it as a state route is just fine. Since it'd be quite boring to just have the same interstate with no exit, it's useless. Just sign it with the route it shares a designation with. Several times over, here's a list of other interstates with no exits. I-790 in upstate New York, with half the length being the on-ramps onto the route. I-395 in Baltimore, glorified on-ramp that's over an estuary for most of its length. I-878 in New York City, not even signed and only goes one direction. But I guess it's cool because it's the shortest interstate. I-189 in Vermont, the only 3-digit interstate in Vermont, and is also useless. Another glorified on-ramp that's a victim of freeway faults. I-115 in Montana, yet another glorified on-ramp that serves a small town of less than 50,000 people. I-315, also in Montana, similar situation to before, but with a slightly bigger town and no signage. And lastly, I-375 in Detroit. Do I even need to explain this one? Yes? Okay. It goes right through the downtown when I-75 already does that. Thankfully, they're planning to destroy it, so shout out to Michigan for some sense in urban planning. For the next part of the video is another type of useless interstate. Interstates that do nothing besides connect two other routes. Regardless of if the connection is actually good. You could argue these types of routes aren't useless. I personally think these types of freeways should be like I-270 Spur in Maryland, not a whole new interstate designation. First of these is I-695 in New York City, which only has slip ramps onto adjacent streets and really only acts as a connector between I-95 and I-278. Easily could become I-95 Spur or something like that. Next up is I-865 of Indianapolis, another one of these connector routes between the Indy Beltway and I-65. Worst problem here is that there are no exits whatsoever along the route. Another 8 route next up is I-880 in Iowa. Connects I-29 and I-80 and... Okay, why is this one even on the list? It's a normal interstate. I swear whoever wrote this list should be fired. We conclude this segment with the infamous I-238 in California. Connects I-580 with I-880. No I-38 in sight. Since California went through all the possible I-80 combinations, they decided to just rename their state route into an interstate route, instead of slapping an I-580 spur onto the sign. Now we arrive at more unique cases of useless interstate. First stop, I-175 and I-375 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Two interstates that do the exact same thing. Be a glorified on-ramp. See a trend? Well, St. Pete saw the other interstates that were glorified on-ramps and said, "I'll take two, please." Then proceeded to say sayonara to these 2 rows of downtown because that's easier than just building a normal exit onto the streets already there. Next up is I-990 in New York. Besides being the highest number interstate, it also serves no purpose. All it does is go through the exurbs of Buffalo before ending randomly at a street that parallels the whole highway. To be fair, it is yet another victim of highway revolts as well as the lack of funding to bring it to its intended destination of Lockport. But I don't even know why this was even considered in the first place, considering Lockport barely even cracks 20,000 people. Second to last is I-172 in Illinois, which is a 20-mile spur route to the city of Quincy, Illinois. Route doesn't even directly service the city, instead bypassing it well to the east before turning into a normal road. Could be somewhat fixed if this was turned into the main line of I-72 and the portion at Hannibal was the spur, But then you'd have a spur to a town of 17,000 people, and it would still be weird. And last but not least, the most useless interstate of them all. I-180. Part 2, because we already talked about the other I-180 in Illinois. So how could you possibly be a worse spur than to a town of 700 people? By not even having a highway. Why, Wyoming? Why? Because Uncle Sam said I was too small for an expensive highway. Wyoming, can you do me a favor? Rip the signs out of the dirt and shove them down his throat! Well, that coconut is gone. How do you know why he's so offended over a literal sign next to a road? Very important road, too. Right over the trains. Since you didn't have time to explain why this road exists, I will. I wasn't lying when I said Uncle Sam told me that a highway's too expensive. I wanted a highway to give the downtown some love, but the big guy said no. I went to the drawing board on how to make it cheaper and decided to just make it less fancy. They said yes, slapped a road down with some American colored signs next to it, and boo, we have an interstate. Oh, I guess I have to do the outro because he's gone. Congratulations on completing the video. Don't know how you handled that dude complaint for so long. Apparently I'm mentioned in this video on screen, so click on it if you want to see me get talked about, I guess.